In the Manchester region during the second quarter of the 19th century, the orientation of textile printing shifted from the domestic market to the export market. British India was an early destination for these printed textiles, followed by the Ottoman Empire, Persia, and China. Although the export trade employed similar methods in each geographic area, design strategy had to be specially tailored to each region. A large calico printworks at Strines in Derbyshire, about 16 kilometres southeast of Manchester, printed for all these different markets, so its record of production forms a useful source for comparisons. A thorough representation of its work is available through designs registered for copyright, especially after 1860, when nearly the entirety of its print production was registered. Samples of prints were preserved in the Patent Office records, now held in the National Archives, and also from 1868, kept in company records in Manchester. So these are equivalent pieces of evidence in two different places. Today we will look at these cottons printed at Strines for export to British India, to Qajar, Iran, and to Meiji, Japan, to observe the different approaches to designing for these markets. In keeping with the theme of the meeting, I will focus on how the design cultures of Britain and the East became intertwined in the conduct of the textile trade. In the early decades of the 19th century, Lancashire export prints were shipped either to Bombay, present-day Mumbai, or Calcutta, present-day Kolkata. There, the goods often went into the hands of British-owned agency companies based in India, but connected by shared directorship to the British-based merchant firms. These agents regularly reported back on what was selling in the local markets, giving specific advice on colors, qualities, patterns, and even the packaging that was desired. A surviving letter book records local knowledge gleaned in July 1825 regarding the desired characteristics for a particular shawl-style print, as we see here. Adam Skinner, an English merchant resident in Bombay, wrote, "Of the pine flower pattern, the consumption here is both considerable and steady, being a style suitable to this presidency, its neighbourhood, and for the Persian Gulf. The goods of this description, sent here by Messrs. Bartons, maintain a decided preference as superior to any others that have yet come in pattern, colours, cloth, and breadth of cloth. The large pine flower pattern in red, cheap chocolate, and blue grounds is one of the most current styles. The flower curved at top." So he's talking about, that's the top of the, what we now call the paisley motif. And the curvature or drooping, carefully to be attended to, as beauty in that particular is much admired here. Another such agent, communicating in 1842 with George Robinson and Co. of Manchester, noted the seasons for goods. While jaconet muslins were suitable for the hot season of March to May, printed calicos were wanted during the rainy season of June to September, and fancy cambrics were in demand from August to November. So the export merchant needed to calculate the journey time of shipping in order for goods to arrive at the right moment to catch this seasonal demand. This is one reason why merchants generally concentrated on one principal geographic region. However, their suppliers, in this case the calico printers at Strines, were able to produce goods for multiple markets with the different geographical seasons spreading the workload more evenly. India was an early destination for Manchester's printed cottons. In the 1820s, which we see here, prints imitated woven shawl styles, seeking to compete with hand-produced artisan manufacturers by means of a cheaper machine-made imitation. But it was an imitation of pattern and color, not texture and construction. This concept of capturing the general look of Indian textiles rather than producing close replicas generally continued to characterize the Manchester trade in India. To take one example, Rajasthani stitch-resist muslins, such as this head cover acquired by the Victoria and Albert Museum in 1883. These muslins were reinterpreted by Scottish Turkey red printers in a relatively flat manner. In the British imitation, the pattern shapes are regularized. The focus is on reproducing the scale and arrangement of pattern and capturing a similar color palette. Another thing to remark is that the British imitations were often filled with work, offering the semblance of a highly decorated piece rather than a common one. The aim was a rich effect at a small price. So Turkey red printing, as we see here, was a speciality confined to a few firms, and Strines didn't do this type of work. It was just a good example. However, in Strines production, we can observe plentiful imitations of the Indian mashru type, which I show here. Mashru is a woven fabric, often striped, with a simple chevron-shaped ikat effect in alternating stripes. Characteristically, it's a mixture fabric with silk warp and cotton weft, and the silk face covers the cotton with a satin weave. The Strines imitations are in plain weave cotton, printed in red, yellow, and black, or red, yellow, and dark green. There was at least one experiment with this imitation in 1872, but it was from 1875 that mashru imitations began to appear more often. At first, they aimed at capturing the popular swan's foot effect of the ikat stripes within their banded outlines. By 1879, imitation mashru became a regular feature of production, and as time progressed, there was the usual shift toward greater elaboration. The richer patterning effects of the South Indian mashru provided models for these, and that's what I'm showing here. Some examples from Tamil Nadu. The Lancashire idea of showiness, giving a customer more for their money, may have played a role in the trend toward elaboration. So these are the same Tamil Nadu designs with, I picked chosen ones, Manchester ones that kind of map onto those. So you can get an idea that it's a very rough approximation. This approach appears to have been effective, as by 1880, the use of small motifs was much more common than the original ikat effects, and the banding was also elaborated into checkering. I think you see some of that in, for instance, the checkered stripes there. A cap, sorry, 1 second. My screen has skipped. Sorry for that. A cap from the Punjab region of northwest India, now in the V&A, is useful as evidence of Indian use of the planar fabrics that we've seen. So there's the Strines registered design on the right. It's not the exact design of the cap, but it's a close match of the type. Successful sales of the more richly patterned types are indicated by the entry of other Manchester region calico printers into production of this style. And this was to lead to conflicts between competitors. In 1881, Strines asked for a legal injunction on a neighbouring calico printer, John Bennett and Sons, for copying a pattern innovation of theirs. Arguing for the originality of the Strines pattern, Charles Neville, a director of the printworks, claimed, even when the stripe has been eliminated, still the principal feature, namely this spade-shaped object, remains. So it's this spade-shaped object. And this object is novel and has, moreover, become a favorite one and sells the pattern. As we can see here, the close similarity between the Bennett spade on the left-hand side and the Strines spade, where we can see that they're very close. But so this was a legal case before a judge, and in December 1881, the judge ruled against the injunction, stating that there was not sufficient identity between the patterns as to mislead any native of India. So in other words, although the differences in the motifs might not be sufficient to distinguish the designs in European eyes, they were thought to hold sufficient difference within their intended marketplace. So this is an interesting concept in itself in terms of the intertwining of cloth cultures. For the contesting parties, it appears that an out-of-court arrangement may have been agreed, with Bennett's work transshipped from the Bombay market, where it was competing, because it turns up in East Africa more often than Strines' work. And this is, I've been doing some work on Ethiopian book bindings and textiles found in them, and I've found only one with Strines' work and about a dozen with Bennett's work. So this is the much rarer match, but a precise match, with an Ethiopian manuscript Psalter now in Leiden. Unlike the Indian export market, the export market to Qajar, Iran, though known as Persia, was dominated by merchants of Greek and Armenian extraction that were resident in Manchester and had business connections in Constantinople. These merchants had a cultural understanding of the Persian market and were sensitive to the requirements of Shia Islam. This was reflected in the design of prints for the Persian market and was crucial to their saleability. British goods initially reached Iran by re-export from Bombay in the 1820s, but in 1841, a commercial treaty allowed British consular agents to reside at Tehran, Tabriz, and Bushehr, and trade with northern Persia via Tabriz grew alongside that of southern Persia via Bushehr. The Manchester trade, which was one of cheap goods, was only hampered by the poverty of the Persian lower classes. This was further exacerbated in the mid-19th century by recurrent droughts and accompanying famines. It was only in the last quarter of the 19th century that the trade gained significantly in volume, aided by the Suez Canal, and in 1888 by the establishment of banks. That's banks in Persia. Persian taste to the Western eye can seem an assemblage of incongruous elements, but such elements had readily recognizable cultural significance for their end users. This can be illustrated by mourning handkerchiefs registered by Samuel Knowes & Co. for use at the annual Shia Muslim commemorations of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. The handkerchiefs usually bear the inscription, "Curse be upon Yazid," referring to the caliph who ordered the death of the Imam. In addition to the curse, Dr. Javad Gomohammadi, who kindly translated for me, commented that the hand-clutching flowers symbolizes a gift to the shrine because the owner cannot make the journey to Kerbala in person, and the crescent moon alludes to the date of Hussein's death on the third day of the lunar month. Another design, seen here on the right, contains a stylized tulip, exalting the observers, "O mourners." The late Patricia Baker commented that the tulip, known for its blood-red color, is a conventional symbol of martyrdom, and the Farsi word for tulip, laleh, is an anagram of Allah, an association often found in Islamic mystical literature. So we can see here that the Manchester Calico printer had accurate cultural advice and visual models to work from, probably supplied by the merchant. A commercial journalist of the time judged that cotton prints for the Persian markets should be of very good colors and of a brilliant finish, so as to compare to more advantage with the kalankars of native manufacture. And it's these chintz-like prints that were the type that Strines produced for the Persian market. They were made with light grounds, red grounds, and dark grounds, And in this example, we can compare the three coloration palettes. Red and dark grounds were used as lining fabrics by the wealthy, and all types could be worn as outer garments by ordinary classes. The light grounds are the most varied, often with symbolic imagery or short texts. The most literary of these illustrates a poetic couplet with a candle, moth, flower, and nightingale. Here, these symbolic elements are all references to longing and loneliness. Another readily identifiable Persian motif is the disembodied hand as an emblem of giving or receiving. An article in the Magazine of Art describing Manchester designs for Eastern markets explains, even in simple floral designs, the Persian women like to have the flower grasped by the human hand. Possibly such symbolism owed its popularity to the Persian custom of giving presents of clothing at the start of the new year, the hand with flowers, again, symbolizing a gift. In the 1880s, sales of opium and Persian carpets brought more wealth to the country, and it was noted in 1884, they are now able to wear fancy prints, whereas formerly their garments consisted almost exclusively of stout cloths dyed with indigo. Increased prosperity did not change the taste in pattern. English aesthetics judged that the banquet scenes that were the most successful of the Persian genre, and one of these here. We've seen that despite the sophistication and specificity of Persian visual culture, Manchester designers were able to successfully imitate Persian styles. Very few published images of Persian art were available to English designers in the 1870s and 80s, so they had to use primary source material obtained by merchants in Persia. It was only in 1889 that such samples began to be forwarded by the resident consular agents with their annual reports and conveyed by the government to the Manchester Chamber of Commerce. And I don't have a photo of the Manchester Chamber of Commerce, but this is the Board of Trade Intelligence Branch sample room, which performed a similar function at a slightly later date. It was a group of merchant samples that was responsible for initiating Strines into manufacturing for the Japanese market. The merchant was David Samuel Bless, who came from a Dutch Jewish background. His father had come to Manchester in 1839 and set up a warehousing business focused on India and Far Eastern markets. Early in 1866, Bless received 76 samples of Japanese printed goods from a client intending to sell copies of them in Japan. When Bless asked Strines to print the patterns, the Printworks management insisted that Bless would have to order at least 25,000 printed pieces. Now, this was a really unusually large minimum order. At the time, Strines stated as the grounds of requiring an order for so large a number that the patterns were so outlandish that the first order must repay to them the whole of their outlay. Nevertheless, the contract was agreed on condition the patterns would be strictly engaged to Bless only. A trial order of 9,000 pieces from the first 29 patterns was approved, and duly followed by a further order of 16,000 pieces of the remaining 47 patterns, and the full order was duly completed by December 1866. Now, this involved a very large number of copper rollers that had been engraved for the order, and a considerable amount of capital was then tied up in the copper, which had its own market value. This expense had to be borne by the Printworks. This is the tradition of calico printing. The Printworks owned the printing matrices, not the merchant. So nevertheless, Bless asked Strines to keep the engravings on the rollers, assured by his client in Japan that there would be future orders. However, the Japanese market was unfavorable for a long, long period, and it was not until 1871, so this, years later, that a further order was given. And another order was placed the following year, But 5 years having passed, Joseph Sidebottom, a partner in the business at Strines, had decided to market the patterns independently. And this led to a legal dispute in 1872 over the rights to the patterns. In court, it became clear that because the 3-year registration period had expired, Strines was within its rights to market the patterns, and eventually Bless withdrew its request for an injunction, settling the matter out of court. Freed from legal constraints, in 1873, Strines re-registered the most popular of the remaining Japanese designs. Some had been turned off the rollers in the intervening years. But Joseph Sidebottom also began to experiment with creating patchworks, modeled on Japanese patchworks made from Indian cloth. So you can start to see some of this intertwining. Japanese patchworks of Indian cloth used as inspiration for Manchester patchworks made from Japanese cloth. The first patchwork was registered in January 1873 and incorporated some of the re-registered patterns. You might recognize these little boys there. These patchworks seem to have been a success, possibly from their novelty value, but were then left off until 1878 when they had another run. Joseph Sidebottom later gave samples of his own designs for Japan to his solicitor, who put together an album of them, which we see here. The inscribed preface to the album also mentions work done for Japanese merchants for their own sale to China. And we see some of those designs here. One aspect of the Japanese designs of interest here is that they truly begin to engage with the subtleties of Japanese and Chinese coloration. Other calico printers attempted to imitate Strines' success without understanding the desired colors. And you've got an example here. So, leaving aside the patchworks, Strines continued to develop Japanese styling with patterns on gray and drab grounds, as we see here, that seem to derive from katagami stencils. Katagami was later to become an enduring inspiration for Western designers, and large collections of stencils were assembled in British design studios. So to conclude, we've seen that accurate cultural information was necessary to achieve the best profits amongst discriminating consumers in British India, Qatar, Iran, and Meiji Japan. Poorly calculated designs might still be transshipped to other markets and sold, although at discount rates. Cultural information included design advice, sketches, and samples for imitation. Liaisons between merchants resident in Manchester and merchants based in the market region were the source of the best information. For the British designer, possibly the most notable result of printing for varied export markets was the stimulus to the field of textile coloration. In the challenge of producing many pattern variations within restricted cultural styles, Manchester's designers employed their habitual response of greater elaboration, as we've seen, which was well suited by the patchwork style. But export pattern variation also gave Manchester designers experience in alternative ways of aesthetic appreciation, outside the traditional training based on European flower painting. It would be difficult to imagine certain European design developments, notably the Art Nouveau movement, without having been able to take off without this intertwining of Eastern and Western modes of patterning. Thank you.